So last week we talked about Apple Silicon and how Apple's going to have more control over the manufacturing, the engineering of the Mac, right? But is this going to be reflected in the price? Stick around. Hey everyone, welcome back to Today in Tech. I'm Juliet Beauchamp. I'm here with Macworld's Michael Simon, as well as Computerworld Executive Editor Ken Mingis. And like I mentioned, now that Apple is going to have more control over, I guess, the whole manufacturing supply chain of the Mac, that's already sort of the case for the iPhone and iPad, right? Do you guys think that this is going to be at all reflected in how expensive it is to buy a Mac?
I'm going to say hope springs eternal, but I wouldn't count on it. I think that the idea here, if I let me just jump in real quick, is that because Apple has the whole stack, that maybe this would be a chance for them to roll out new hardware and maybe offer a little bit of a price cut to say, hey, just for a little extra attention. But Mike, I don't know. That's not really the Apple style, is it?
It is not. And what's interesting about, so I went back and I looked at the Intel transition, and prices actually went up. So the MacBook replaced the 14-inch MacBook. I'm sorry, the MacBook replaced the 14-inch iBook, as well as the 12-inch MacBook Pro. At the time they were offering one of those, and that was $1099 versus $999 for the 14-inch iBook with PowerPC. Later in the year, the Mac Mini came out. That was $599 versus $499 the prior year. And then the MacBook Air came out about 2 years later, and that was just, I think it was like $1,800, which was for a 12-inch laptop was whoa. I mean, that was expensive, very expensive,
Yeah, I
and it
remember
wasn't even
that.
that
Yeah.
powerful. It was more about its portability and its efficiencies and the thinness and design. So what we can extrapolate from that is chips basically have no real impact on price. It's the whole thing that you have to take into account, because presumably Intel and PowerPC were, if not priced accordingly, Intel might have even been a little bit cheaper because they were making more volume of these things. But Apple doesn't really work that way. It doesn't. Whenever we see those articles about this is what it costs to build an iPhone, why is Apple charging so much? Because that's not really what it is. The bill of materials, so to speak, is it's a handy list of what Apple needs to pay out for its parts. So much more goes into developing anything. I mean, we're talking about Apple here, but so much more goes into developing an iPhone, an iPad, a Mac, that we're talking about research and development, we're talking about marketing, we're talking about prototypes, we're talking about the way they have to engineer parts to fit. All these things matter and all these things count. Apple owns all these little companies that participate in these things. They have liquid metal, they have fabrication, they have all these things that work. Just because they own them doesn't mean that they don't cost them money. It still matters to the whole process. And will we see a cheaper Mac? Maybe. Will we see a cheaper Mac based on what we know now? I doubt it.
Yeah, I kind of have a feeling that what we're going to be looking at, Apple loves to do the thing where it upgrades the hardware, new chip, new
Yeah.
graphics, things like that,
I
and
mean, that's
keeps
an
the
industry
price.
thing. It's not just Apple. Everyone does that.
No, right, but I
We
mean,
follow it because everything Apple does matters, but HP and then they all iterate their computers. Dell. That's just that's how it goes.
so I was going to turn it around and say, do you think that Apple might actually use this as an opportunity to bump prices, as they did before, and say, well, you've got the whole Apple stack now, and there's so much more value here, and I presume maybe not this year, but next year, a different form factor, something to catch the eye, and then they can, add another 150 bucks on top of whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a different era here. And I don't necessarily think that Tim Cook gets enough credit for keeping prices low. That's a crazy thing to say, because I know Apple makes some of the most expensive. When we think of Apple, we think of high-end luxury devices. That's not really the case. For example, the iPhone, $999, $1099, the Galaxy S20, which just came out a couple months ago, is $999, $1299, $1499. So, it's not like Apple's alone here. And Apple has done a good job of picking a price point and sticking with it. You can look at the Apple Watch. Yes, it's expensive. It's very expensive. It's probably the most expensive smartwatch, the most expensive, quote unquote, mainstream smartwatch. But they also sell a Series 3 for $200. That's perfectly good. Great, even. Probably better than any Fitbit that you can get that's about the same price. So Apple they're very conscious, way more than they have been in the past, if you ask me, of who is now their customer. Yes, you have the niche people like you who will spend thousands of dollars on whatever they release.
What?
But that's not their core anymore. That's a very small part of their audience. And they're selling 50 million iPhones a quarter, not $1,200 or $1,500. They're not selling the $1,100 and the $1,500 model, and not 15, 11 and whatever it is, $1,250 for the high end. They're selling the iPhone 11, which doesn't get nearly enough credit for how affordable, quote unquote, affordable it is. I mean, that's $700, and that thing can take on any of the Android premium phones. The iPhone SE is $400. That has an A14, so let's talk about that. That's the chip. The A14 is the high end, A14 or A13. I can't remember now. Now I'm blank because I don't have iOS 14 in my mind. Whatever it is,
I think it's A13.
A13. It's the high end, the highest end chip that they make. The same one they put in their $1,100 iPhone is also in the $399 iPhone. So that gives you a somewhat of an indication of what the chip is costing. The reason why the iPhone 11 Pro, I have all these numbers in my head. We're at 11, right?
Yes.
Yeah. The reason why the iPhone 11 Pro is $1,000 and up, it's not necessarily because of the chip. It's because of everything that goes into it: the camera, the design, the engineering, the logic board, the way the screen folds so you have a uniform bezel. All of that stuff is why the iPhone is a certain way. It's why the 16-inch MacBook costs what it does. And when compared to like a Dell XPS or something like that, I mean, there's a lot that you have to take into consideration when you consider a price, and I think Apple will absolutely do that. They're not going to come out with a MacBook Air that's $1,500 because they know that's not going to fly right now. Maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have. I mean, like I said, the MacBook Air when it came out was $1,800. That is absurd. But they sold them, and it made an impact, and it transformed the industry. It wasn't a one and done product. I mean, that was the thing that made laptops small, thin, light, and basically got rid of ultra portable, those like netbooks, and showed how regular sized laptops could be just as portable and thin and light. And that's, here we are now where everyone is doing a version of that. So, but I don't think that would fly today. I don't think they could just come out with a ridiculously expensive laptop unless it has lots and lots and lots of innovations. And even then, I don't see it happening. I think they're going to stick to this ballpark, iterate and innovate for sure. But I think they'll try to keep that ballpark, $999 for starters, and it goes up to like $2,500 or something.
Yeah.
Juliet,
what do you think?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine about the price specifics, but Mike, you do make a good point that it's not just because they have control over the chip doesn't mean that they didn't have to, maybe re-engineer some things, and that's going to be reflected in the price. Obviously, more goes into making a Mac and the new Macs than just, we have control over the chip now, so maybe we can make it a little bit cheaper. So
right. And also, so if they save money here, maybe they'll spend a little more money here. Like they do. If you look at Apple's balance sheet, they like this 38 to 42% margin. That's what they try to hit. But that doesn't, that means that AirPods are making a certain amount on iPhones. Like it's all an average, and they know what the Mac makes. I doubt it's 40%, but they know what it makes. So if that margin goes up for chips and whatever engineering they need to do there, then they can spend a little more on battery or a little more on this display or whatever it is. The Mac has compromises. The camera stinks. The keyboard until recently was terrible. It doesn't have enough ports. So there are things that they are, quote unquote, cutting corners to reach a certain level and a certain price and to mass market these things. And, maybe when they save money here, we'll start to see some of the things that we'd like to see come to the Mac actually arrive, Face ID, like the things that aren't there yet. Now it frees up a little bit, wiggle room for them to develop other aspects of the machine.
I'm going to put in a quick pitch for like if there's going to be wiggle room and there are going to be some minuscule improvements on the edges while they keep the price the same. Since everybody's working from home, can we please get a better camera?
Yeah,
I agree.
that's
What is it, a 720p? It's like,
it's
come on,
awful.
folks. It's like,
awful.
it's like
it makes no
1080.
sense.
I mean, I don't need 4K. I don't want to be seen in 4K,
I mean,
but at least a 1080p would be nice.
When your iPhone is a better selfie camera than your Mac, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they might have just said, what, forget it, because we're designing this next thing. So we're just going to hold off on all that stuff. And, we suffer as a result of it. And, Apple's not unique in that, where, features are held off for, the next generation, and whether it's pricing or whether it's availability or ability or feasibility or whatever it is. I do think that's probably number one on their list of things that need to change once we get these new Macs.
So I think my hopes for a cheaper Apple Silicon Mac have probably now been dashed, Mike.
Well, no, that's not. I don't think that's necessarily true because, first of all, the MacBook Air is $1,000 and it's a great machine. Secondly, just because the Macs we know now, the MacBook Pro, the MacBook Air, the Mac Mini, the what's it called, the Mac Pro, iMac. Like, I don't think those are going to necessarily fluctuate, but that doesn't mean that a cheaper Mac isn't on the horizon. That doesn't mean that there won't be a new MacBook, which they retired a while ago, and I think they retired it for a reason.
They'll bring it back. They're going to bring it back.
Yeah. So maybe there will be a $699 MacBook that's like the iPhone SE, that is fast, cuts some corners here on the display and the design, whatever it is, but, is a cheap Mac for people who don't need even the power of a MacBook Air. So I think you can get your hopes up. I don't think, I think if you want a 16-inch MacBook Pro that's under $2,000, that's not going to happen.
Well, so that's what I'm saying. I started off with hope springs eternal, and now I guess we sort of wrap with my hopes for a $1,699 MacBook Pro 16-inch with whatever.
There's definitely reason to be hopeful that the Mac will get cheaper, and again, this is all a process. There's a roadmap that we don't know that goes beyond Tim Cook and beyond the iPhone and beyond all this stuff that, whether it comes to fruition is another thing. But Apple thinks way, 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 way ahead of what the rest of the industry thinks. I mean, that's why they're always so, look at AirPods. They came out with AirPods when the iPhone 7 launched. People said they were out of their mind. They took away the headphone jack and said, oh, you don't want a headphone jack? Here's a $130 pair of earphones. We're going to cut off the cord, and we're going to give you this. $130, and you have to buy them because we are taking away the headphone. Not have to, but we're going to encourage you to buy them because we're taking away the headphone jack. They were ridiculed relentlessly. People took photos of how silly they looked in their ears. They were called cigarettes in your ears, mercilessly. And now what? They're the biggest thing. They're everywhere.
Love
every
my
single
AirPods
show
Pros.
that I see, every Zoom call, every live from home thing, Peloton, Food Network, whatever it is, everyone's wearing AirPods. Apple has a knack for seeing, and listen, they didn't see the pandemic that obviously helped accelerate this, but they did see the fashion, the Bluetooth, the wireless, all that stuff years ago, way before the iPhone 10 came out, way before everyone started getting rid of headphone jacks. So, they chose now to do this Apple Silicon for a reason. And, we will see all of that come to fruition, within a little bit later this year, and then, down the road,
Next year.
5, 7, 10 years from now. Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
I've got, I think, one more question, which I've been thinking about since they announced Apple Silicon. And let me know if I'm sort of been led astray in my mind here, but I'm thinking to last year when they announced the new Mac Pro, which is insanely expensive. And now, is that Is Apple Silicon somehow going to make the new Mac Pro that they just released last year obsolete in any way?
I mean, I'm the number one answer to that is no. The number two answer to that is I don't even know how fast the Mac Pro is going to get an Apple chip. The thing about the MacBook Pro is it's not for me or Ken or you or anybody listening to this call, probably. It's for very high-end, very niche types, like people who work at Pixar and people who develop, for Marvel and things like that. Like, it's not for normal people. It's not even for Apple's regular pro user. I mean, the thing costs $6,000.
Even I don't have one. That tells you something.
Even if you could afford it, I mean, listen, we could all, scrounge and save and buy one. There's no point. We wouldn't even come close to tapping in what it could do. So there's no reason to buy it. You can make excuses to buy a high-end MacBook Pro with the better processor and more storage. There's literally no reason for any of us to have this computer. That said, the reason why people buy it is so these programs work fast and work, for hours on end when they're probably not even, sitting with them. They have rendering farms and things like this. If you plug in an Apple Silicon chip into that causes a lot of potential problems. So I'm not even sure the Mac Pro is going to be part of this transition for a little while. Tim Cook did say that Apple is going to continue to support and make Intel-based machines. There's already rumors that the new iMac will come out sometime this year with Intel processors. Now we're getting closer to the end of the year, so maybe that rumor was bogus. But we were supposed to get them at WWDC, we didn't. So I don't think Apple is just dumping Intel at all. And if there is a machine that's going to keep them, the Mac Pro makes the most sense because they first of all, they sell very few of them. But secondly, the people who need them and need the support for them and need them to work with new versions of OS 10 and new apps and updates and all this stuff, they're the most demanding customers. And if Apple loses them by putting in a chip that doesn't support some codec on a video app or an audio app, they're screwed. So they have to be very careful with that segment.
I think you make a very compelling case, Mike, that's probably the one part of the product line where I actually could see in, say, 2 or 3 years, a bifurcation where you actually still have the Intel Mac Pros, and then they add an Apple Silicon-based Mac Pro. And that would be for people to be able to make that switch on their own time rather than being forced to by Apple. Because you're right. I mean, those are for people where time literally is money. Yeah. And, they need everything. And they also run these very rarefied, rarefied software that you just don't want to screw that up. I could easily see like an overlap there.
And the Mac Pro isn't the kind of Mac that you need to update every year or every 2 years or every 5 years even. Like the Mac, the last one, it took years to get a new processor even. Because they're like insanely fast, and people install tons of them, and they leave them there for a decade. So I don't think Apple is even worried about that right now. This is a consumer/prosumer move.
Agreed.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for calling in and chatting with me. So I feel like, Mike, I think you may have mentioned it, but I think the biggest question of all, what is going to be the price before I let you guys go? What are you thinking is that going to be the price?
We got to figure out which one it's going to be.
The latest rumors say the first 2 machines are the MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Right now, the Air is $1,000 and up, and the MacBook Pro starts at $1,299, and that sounds right to me. I think that, if anything, the MacBook Pro, the 13-inch MacBook Pro might get a little bit higher, because right now that $1,299 MacBook Pro is not a machine anybody should buy. It's somewhat crippled. It's just not good. So you want the $1,500 one if you're going to buy that level, and the MacBook Air is plenty good enough to cover that spread from $1,000 to $1,500. So they might do away with the low end tier of the MacBook Air, maybe add a couple of configurations. I'm sorry, the low end tier of the MacBook Pro, maybe add a couple of configurations to the MacBook Air to fill that gap a little bit more, and then keep the Pro higher. And then the 16-inch, I think, starts at 23 maybe. That would be the next tier. And the iMac, I don't know, because the iMac, it's been so long since it had a real change in design and I/O and all that stuff. So the rumor is that it's going to be a massive redesign. Right now, it starts at $12.99. That sounds about right, but I wouldn't be surprised if that maybe went down to $11.99, like a lower end version of that, because the iMac is, people don't need power in it. So if you kind of increase that spread, you got the Pro at the high end, and then like a real cheap one, like someone who doesn't want an Air but wants a cheap Mac. There was a time when they were $10.99. So maybe Apple could go back to that level and really increase the spread of the iMac, because really that's the only Mac desktop worth buying. People aren't buying the Mac Mini, and no one needs the Mac Pro.
Yeah, I would argue a lot of it depends on the pandemic and how it unfolds.
Yeah, sure.
I would have argued that I could easily see Apple making $100, $150 across the board increase, despite my hopes for lower priced Macs. I hope, but I don't really expect that. I do think that the economic drag that we're seeing right now might give Apple some pause in terms of raising prices right now. They might stand pat, at least for the first rollout this year. And then maybe if things begin to improve economically next year, we might see some $100, $150, increases on each step. But I think for now, probably it's going to be status quo on price.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Apple cares about. I mean, they just released a $350 iPad keyboard right in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, I don't think they care.
Well, but that was already planned. They were going to roll that out. They just didn't let the pandemic stop them.
I mean, to Apple's credit, I don't necessarily think that they pad their prices to say, well, we can make more now, so let's do it.
No.
So I think whatever prices they have in mind are the prices they're going to stick to, for better or worse. And, we'll see what that is. But I expect there to be a Mac notebook that starts at $999. And I expect there to be a Mac notebook that starts at $3,000 plus when this is all over.
All
I'll start saving my money.
Well, thank you.
You're richer than all of us. You don't have to save any money.
Yeah, right. Because I'm buying Apple products. I have the money.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for calling in. Really appreciate it, as always. And thank you all so much for watching this episode of Today in Tech. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon in the corner so you're notified every single time we post a new video. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments about the new Mac pricing, let me know in the comments below, or even predictions. What will you spend? What won't you spend? Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.